The wind howled through the night, carrying the feeble cries of a newborn, echoing through the small hut. The old midwife gazed at the tiny infant wrapped in tattered cloth and let out a heavy sigh. "This child has no one," she murmured, her eyes lingering on the lifeless body of the young mother who had perished in childbirth. Just as she was about to leave the baby to fate, a shadow darkened the doorway. It was Mama Kem. "Give me the child," she said, her voice calm but resolute. The midwife hesitated. "You already have a daughter, Mama Kem, another mouth to feed." "I said, give me the child." Reluctantly, the midwife placed the fragile infant into Mama Kem's arms. The woman cradled the baby close, feeling the delicate warmth against her skin. She had no idea that this decision would become her greatest regret. Mama Kem named the baby Amara and brought her home to her small hut, where her own daughter, Zara, slept soundly. Amara grew up believing Mama Kem was her real mother. She loved and obeyed her, even when she was made to do all the household chores while Zara played freely outside. But as Amara grew, her beauty became undeniable. Her smooth, dark skin glowed like the moonlight, her eyes sparkled like the stars, and her long hair flowed like a river. The villagers began to whisper, "Is she really Mama Kem's daughter? She looks nothing like her." Zara, once the center of attention, soon found herself overshadowed. And she noticed how the village boys looked at Amara instead of her. Even the son of the wealthiest trader, the one she secretly admired, couldn't take his eyes off Amara. Jealousy burned within Zara like an unquenchable fire. One evening, as Amara finished washing clothes, she overheard whispers from the kitchen. She hid behind the door, listening. "She's not even your real daughter," Zara hissed. Amara's heart stopped. "She's adopted, isn't she?" Zara continued. "That's why she's so different from us. She doesn't belong here, Mama. She's just a burden." Mama Kem let out a weary sigh. "You're right. She was never mine. I should have left her that night." Amara clutched her chest, a sharp pain searing through her. The only mother she had ever known had never wanted her. After that night, Mama Kem and Zara no longer hid their disdain. Amara was no longer treated as a daughter but as a servant. She cooked, cleaned, ran errands, while Zara did nothing. She ate scraps while Zara feasted. Then, one morning, Mama Kem called Amara outside. "You're getting married," she said coldly. Amara gasped. "Married? To who?" "To Kofi," Mama Kem replied. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Everyone in the village knew Kofi, a poor, struggling fisherman who lived in a crumbling hut by the river. A man with a limp, mocked and ridiculed by all. Tears welled in Amara's eyes. "Mama, please." Mama Kem grabbed her arm roughly. "Don't call me Mama. I should have thrown you away years ago. You mean nothing to me now. You will marry Kofi and leave this house. Do you understand?" Zara smirked from the doorway, enjoying Amara's pain. Amara swallowed hard. She had no choice. The next day, with no wedding dress, no celebration, and no family to bless her, Amara was cast away as the wife of a man the village mocked. But Mama Kem and Zara did not know the truth. The man they had discarded Amara to, the poor fisherman, was secretly a billionaire. As Amara followed Kofi toward his tiny hut, fear and sorrow weighed on her heart. She wanted to cry, to scream, to run. But where would she go? She had no one. Kofi's home was just as the villagers described, small, with a leaking roof, a creaky wooden bed, and a single stool. The air smelled of damp wood and fish. "This is your home now," Kofi said, his voice quiet but firm. Amara remained silent, staring in disbelief. From Mama Kem's house to this, was this truly her fate? Kofi studied her carefully. He wasn't blind to her pain, but he said nothing. Instead, he laid a mat on the floor and pointed at it. "You can sleep here." Amara looked at him in surprise. She had feared the worst, that he would demand his rights as a husband on the first night. But he simply lay on the wooden bed, turning his back to her. As the night deepened, Amara curled up on the mat, silent tears rolling down her face. The wind howled through the cracks in the hut, mirroring the loneliness echoing in her heart. Was this what her life had become? A wife to a man she did not love, cast away like she was worthless. She cried until sleep finally took her. Morning came with whispers and laughter. As Amara stepped outside, the village women had already gathered, pretending to fetch water but only there to see her. "Look at the rich man's daughter, now the wife of a beggar," one woman sneered. "Does Kofi even have food to give her?" another laughed. Amara kept her head down, swallowing the shame. She had been mocked in Mama Kem's house, but this was worse. Just then, Zara appeared, dressed in fine clothes, her skin glowing with expensive oils. She smirked. "Sister, how's married life?" she asked, her voice dripping with mockery. Amara clenched her fists. Zara stepped closer and whispered, "You should be grateful. At least someone wanted you. No man of status would ever marry an abandoned child like you." The sting of her words cut deep, but Amara refused to let the tears fall. Without a word, she turned and walked away, leaving Zara laughing with the other women. She spent hours by the river, staring at her reflection. "Maybe they're right," she whispered to herself. "Maybe I really am nothing." But deep in her heart, something told her that fate had more in store for her. Days turned to weeks. Amara learned to live with Kofi, though she barely spoke to him. She cleaned the hut, fetched water, and cooked. It was not an easy life, but it was better than Mama Kim's house. One afternoon, struggling to carry a heavy basket of yams from the market, she tripped. The yams spilled everywhere. The women around her laughed. Even as a poor man's wife, she is still useless. Amara's face burned with humiliation. She bent down to gather the yams, when a strong hand reached out to help. She looked up in shock. It was Kofi. He picked up the yams without a word and handed her the basket. Amara expected mockery, like everyone else. But instead, he said softly, "You don't have to carry everything alone." Something shifted inside her. For the first time in her life, someone had shown her kindness, without expecting anything in return. For the first time, she truly looked at Kofi. Who was this man? The villagers called him a fool. They laughed at him. But Amara began to wonder, who was Kofi, really? Zara scoffed, her lips curling in disdain. "How dare you speak to me like that? Do you even know who I am?" Kofi stepped forward, his expression unshaken. "I know exactly who you are, a woman who delights in the suffering of others. But not here. Not in my home." Zara opened her mouth, ready to fire back, but something made her pause. For the first time, she truly looked at Kofi. There was something about the way he stood, the quiet authority in his voice. He was not just some poor, crippled fisherman. There was an air of power around him, something unspoken yet undeniable. Without another word, she grabbed her basket and stormed out. Amara turned to Kofi, stunned. No one had ever defended her before. She stared at him, her heart pounding. "Who are you, Kofi?" she whispered. Kofi only smiled, but his eyes held secrets. Amara couldn't shake the strange feeling he left in her heart. He was unlike any man she had ever met. He barely spoke, yet his actions carried more meaning than words ever could. After Zara's cruel visit, Kofi disappeared for hours. Alone in the hut, Amara's thoughts spiraled. Was this her fate, to be mocked forever? Night fell, and just as she was preparing to sleep, Kofi returned, carrying a small bundle. He placed it beside her mat. She looked at him, confused. "What is this?" Kofi nodded toward it. "Open it." Hesitantly, Amara untied the cloth. Inside was warm bread, roasted fish, and a small wooden flask of fresh palm wine. She gasped. Where did you get this?" she whispered. Kofi shrugged. "You haven't eaten properly in days." Amara swallowed hard. The last time anyone had cared about her hunger was when she was a child, before Mama Kimmy's cruelty had begun. Tears filled her eyes as she picked up the bread, but before she could take a bite, she set it down and looked at Kofi. "Did you eat?" Kofi smirked slightly. "I'm not the one who fainted yesterday." Amara felt her heart tighten. Slowly, she broke the bread in half and held one piece out to him. He hesitated. "Please," she whispered. "Eat with me." For the first time since she had been forced into this marriage, Kofi sat beside her and ate. The silence between them was no longer heavy with pain, it was soft, understanding. And though Amara still did not know who Kofi really was, for the first time, she felt safe. That night, as the cold wind howled through the cracks in the hut, Amara lay shivering on her mat, pulling her thin wrapper tightly around her. Kofi, from his wooden bed, noticed her discomfort. Without a word, he got up, walked over to her, and placed a thick cloth over her body. Amara's breath hitched. She turned slightly, looking up at him. "Kofi, you don't have to. You'll catch another fever," he said simply. Amara clutched the cloth, feeling an unfamiliar warmth, not from the fabric, but from the kindness she wasn't used to receiving. She turned back, blinking rapidly to stop the tears from falling. She had spent years believing she was unwanted, unloved. But here was a man who owed her nothing, yet showed her more care than her own family ever had. That night, Amara slept deeply for the first time in years, and for once, she dreamed of something other than sadness. The next morning, as Amara fetched water from the river, she heard whispers. "Did you hear? That poor fisherman bought expensive food yesterday. Where did he get the money? He must have stolen it." Amara's heart pounded. At the market, the rumors had spread further. "I saw him with my own eyes," a woman said. "Fresh bread and palm wine. How can he afford that?" "Maybe he's not as poor as we think," another muttered. Amara clenched her fists. The village had always mocked Kofi, but now they were suspicious. She hurried home and found him sharpening his knife as usual. "Kofi," she said urgently, "where did you get the food yesterday?" He glanced at her, his face unreadable. "Does it matter?" "Yes, it does," Amara insisted, stepping closer. "People are talking. They think you stole it." Kofi chuckled. "Let them think what they want." Amara frowned. "Kofi, I need to know. Who are you?" He looked at her for a long moment before simply saying, "A man who doesn't want to see his wife suffer." Amara's heart thudded. For the first time, she realized Kofi was hiding something. His kindness, his quiet strength, the way he carried himself, it was unlike any poor fisherman she had ever known. One evening, as she sat outside peeling cassava, she saw Kofi sitting by the doorway, lost in thought. The setting sun cast long shadows on his face, making him look distant, almost sad. She hesitated before speaking. "Kofi, why do you live like this?" His hand stilled on his knife. "You could have married anyone," she said, voice trembling. "But you took a woman like me, someone thrown away like scraps. And you never complain. Never raise your voice. Why?" Kofi let out a slow breath, his dark eyes unreadable. "Because I know what it means to be abandoned." Amara's heart twisted. "I was once a boy who had everything," he continued. "Food. Servants. A father who was one of the richest men in the land. But when I lost my ability to walk properly, I became worthless to them. My father sent me away, ashamed of me." Amara's breath hitched. "I learned to survive on my own," Kofi said, his voice heavy with old wounds. "I worked in places where no one cared for me. And I realized something: poverty does not make a person less worthy. But the world will treat you like it does." Tears stung Amara's eyes. She had spent years being treated as less, simply because she was adopted. She had believed that pain belonged only to her. But here was a man who had suffered just as she had, perhaps even more. For the first time, Amara truly saw Kofi. Not as the poor, crippled man the village mocked, but as someone who understood her in ways no one else ever had. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand over his. Kofi looked at her, surprised. You are not worthless, she whispered. Something in Kofi's eyes softened. He didn't say anything, but his fingers tightened around hers. In that moment, they weren't two strangers forced into a marriage. They were two souls, cast aside, finally finding comfort in each other. Amara's chest ached. She had always known that Zara and Mama Kem didn't love her, but hearing it spoken so plainly, like she was nothing more than a discarded object, felt like a knife slicing through her heart. Zara smirked, tilting her head with cruel amusement. Did you really think you deserved a good life? A girl like you? An orphan? A nobody? Amara swallowed the pain rising in her throat. She would not cry, not this time. Instead, she straightened her back, meeting Zara's gaze with quiet defiance. I may be poor, she said softly, but I am not broken. For the first time, Zara's smirk faltered. There was something different about Amara, something Zara couldn't quite place, but she didn't like it. With a sharp turn, her golden bracelets clinking as she moved, she walked away. Amara stood there, staring after her, her heart pounding. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a helpless girl begging for love. She felt like something more. And deep in her bones, she knew Kofi had something to do with that. That evening, Amara sat outside, watching Kofi as he mended a basket. She hesitated before speaking. Why did you marry me? Kofi paused, looking up. His eyes searched hers. Because I wanted to, he said simply. Amara frowned. But why? I was forced on you. You could have refused. Kofi sighed, setting the basket aside. You think you were the only one who was forced? He asked quietly. Amara's breath caught. What do you mean? Kofi looked away for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. Then, he turned back to her, his face unreadable. Things are not always what they seem, Amara, he said. A chill crawled up her spine. Kofi was hiding something, something that could change everything. She sat frozen, his words echoing in her mind. You think you were the only one who was forced? She had always believed she was the one thrown away, the one abandoned. But Kofi's voice held something deeper, something she couldn't quite grasp. She watched him as he returned to his work, his fingers steady as they wove the basket. Kofi, she whispered, her throat dry. Who are you? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he sighed, setting the basket aside. Then, he met her gaze. Do you really want to know? Amara swallowed hard. Yes. Kofi stood, brushing the dust from his clothes. Follow me. She followed Kofi through the narrow, winding paths of the village. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows on the ground. She didn't ask where they were going. Something in Kofi's posture told her she was about to find out everything. After what felt like an eternity, they stopped in front of a massive iron gate. Amara's heart pounded. This wasn't a poor man's home, this was a mansion. She turned to Kofi, her lips trembling. What is this? Kofi stepped forward, pushing the gate open. Inside was a grand compound filled with towering trees, golden lanterns, and a house so large it looked like something from a dream. Amara's breath caught in her throat. She had spent her whole life being told she wasn't worthy of love, that she was destined for nothing. Yet the man she had been forced to marry stood before a palace. Kofi turned to her, his expression unreadable. This is my home, he said softly. Amara took a shaky step forward. But, you're poor. Kofi's lips curled into a small smile. No, Amara. I only wanted people to think I was poor. She felt dizzy. Nothing made sense anymore. Kofi walked ahead, leading her toward the grand house. Amara followed, her heart racing as they stepped inside. She stared at the fine woven rugs, the large carved chairs, the golden ornaments decorating the walls. She turned to Kofi, her voice barely above a whisper. Why? Kofi sighed, looking away. Because I needed to know who truly loved me. I was tired of women who only saw my wealth. Amara's heart ached. So this whole time, he had been testing her? She thought back to the suffering, the hunger, the pain. You let me believe we were struggling, she whispered, her voice shaking. You let me cry myself to sleep, thinking I had lost everything. Kofi stepped closer. I didn't do it to hurt you, Amara. But you did, she said, her eyes welling up. You did. Kofi reached for her hands, but she stepped back. She had spent her whole life being lied to, she didn't know if she could take another betrayal. Kofi's eyes softened. Amara, I love you. She let out a broken laugh, wiping her tears. Then why didn't you tell me sooner? Kofi took a deep breath. Because I was afraid. Amara closed her eyes. She didn't know what hurt more, the truth itself or the fact that he had waited so long to tell her. She turned away, her heart heavy. I need time, she whispered. And for the first time since they had been married, she walked away from Kofi.